everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the new movie Barbarian. Barbarian is a new horror movie that came out last week and it looked intriguing, so I thought I'd check it out. The synopsis is as follows. A young woman discovers the rental home she booked is already occupied by a stranger. Against her better judgment, she decides to spend the night, but soon discovers there's a lot more to fear than just an unexpected house guest. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. I have some pretty mixed feelings about the plot of this movie. The story behind this movie is really original, but the content is fairly disturbing. Tess books a stay at an Airbnb that's close to where she'll be interviewing for a job. She finds that the house is already occupied by a gentleman named Keith, but they decide to work things out and she sleeps on the bed, he sleeps on the couch. But Tess finds her way down to the basement and ends up finding a secret doorway behind the wall in the basement. And some pretty creepy things end up happening after that. What it boils down to is I think this movie can be split into 3 acts. The first act of this movie is more horror. The second act of this movie is more storytelling based with the introduction of some comedy. And Act 3 of this movie leans more towards B-rated horror / comedy. And the thing is that I think this movie does a great job in all 3 of those genres, which is the most unique part about this movie and what I liked most about it. I'm not really sure how they did it, but normally a shocking tone change like that might completely throw the movie, but in this case I think it made the movie better because it stood apart from a standard horror movie and introduced quite a bit of comedy into the film. Unfortunately, there is an underlying tone in this movie of all men being bad and cops being bad. Every single man in this movie can be perceived as evil. Every woman in this movie can be perceived as good. And they just straight up make the cops look negligent and bad, which I know is armor for the plot, but I think they could have done it in a different way that didn't feed into the narrative of all cops being bad. I think this movie took the easy way out when it came to those things, and I wasn't a fan of it, especially for a film that seemed to be as creative as it was. But even with the good things that I had to say about this plot and that it was a unique story, the content is extremely disturbing, like super jacked up. So because of all these different factors involved in the plot, I have to give plot a 50-50. 2 is family friendliness. Absolutely not. This movie has a lot of profanity, it has graphic nudity, it has pretty graphic violence and blood and gore. And again, the story driving this movie is so disturbing and messed up that I wouldn't say it's good for any audiences to consume. I will say that the nudity in this movie is not sexual, but they definitely focus a lot on it. And while I found myself laughing at different situations that were happening, it's just really disgusting and disturbing. So this movie's not family friendly at all. Thumbs down. 3 is acting and script. Bill Skarsgård and Georgina Campbell did a great job in this movie. Their acting performances were very convincing, and the roles they were given felt really natural for them on screen. There were some clunky moments in Skarsgård's script, some that were even edging towards not believable, but it wasn't enough for me to throw out his performance. I'm a huge fan of Justin Long as an actor, and in this movie, even though you are supposed to despise his character, his acting performance was hilarious. So while he stole the show for me, I thought everyone's acting performances were good, and their scripts were good for the most part. So for me, acting and script get a thumbs up. 4 is character development. You know, for as much as this movie wanted you to hate all men, the men were the most developed people in this movie. We get to know the character of Keith, we get to know the character of AJ. Heck, we even get to know the character of Frank. But the person that we barely get any character development with is Tess. For some reason, her character was the most underdeveloped in the movie. Yeah, we know why she's there, we know what she's doing, but she's used as an assistant character to build up the character development of everybody else. We don't really end up finding out too much about her. And I think that was one of the downfalls of this movie. You see her kind of fade as the main protagonist, and it ends up being more about Justin Long than it does about her. It is a shame that Tess's character didn't get more character development, but for the characters they did develop, it was done very naturally, and I enjoyed it, so character development gets a thumbs up. 5 is visuals and CGI. I think some of the visuals in this movie were great. In Act 2, when they were doing more of the storytelling, they used a lot of wide shots, and then they used some crop frame shots, all of them being very vivid and colorful. Act 3 of this movie comes dangerously close to B-rated horror movie territory, and I understand that that may have been by design, but that's also where some of the worst CG in this movie was. So for me, visuals and CGI get a 50-50. And 6 is rewatchability. I was a huge fan of the way this movie had its tone shifts, but the story behind this movie is really disturbing, to the point where overall, Barbarian becomes more of an experience to watch than it is something I would rewatch again, because honestly I wouldn't. Rewatchability gets a thumbs down. With all these areas considered, I have to give Barbarian a 6 out of 10. This movie was original, it had some great acting performances, I laughed a lot. The 2 tone shifts in this movie I thought were masterfully done, but this movie was disturbing. The focus on graphic nudity, the blood and gore, the language, and the non-essential underlying tones of all men being evil and cops being bad didn't do it for me in this movie. Not to mention the fact that I think that Tess was a really good protagonist, but they faded her into the background from Act 2 forward. So honestly, this movie had a lot going for it, but it also kind of cut itself at the knees. So while I can't honestly recommend anyone go see this movie, if you don't care a lot about what you see on screen or how disturbing it is, if you're looking for a unique story with some pretty great tone shifts, you might want to go check out Barbarian in theaters. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen Barbarian, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.